What's up ninjas, Brendan here, and today we're going to continue our AI Dev on Injective series, and this time we're going to go for Roo Setup. Here's what we're going to cover, quite a few things. So we'll start with what is Roo, then installing and running it, then adding an Open Router API key, and then cloning the vibe coding starter repo, and then within that repo we're going to review a few things. First we'll take a look at a set of documentation for architecture, PRD, and tasks. And then we'll take a look at config, which includes MCP modes and rules. All right, so let's start with what is Roo. All right, so Roo is this, right? It is a VS Code extension or plugin, which you can install quite easily using their plugin ecosystem. And then it's basically lets you vibe code, right? You can use generative AI models or LLMs to write code for you, but that's not all, right? We'll learn the full extent of it. What I have done, and we'll take a look at this later, is created a Roo optimized or Roo specific vibe coding repo, which we can make use of, right? All the configurations that you need for Injective development. Now, the next thing we're going to do is install and run Roo, right? So we're going to open up VS Code. Right, and inside of here we're going to have several plugins. By clicking, look at all the plugins by looking inside here. Now I already have it installed, but if you just search for Roo, you should find a few different versions of Roo, but the one that you want is the one that is the most popular. It's got over 1 million, downloads, and you simply need to press the install button over here, and it'll just automatically do that. Now, when you open up VS Code, you might see build with agent. Don't get confused by that. That is the built-in GitHub agent, and you can just close that. Right. So once you've got that installed, right, you will see an icon. Hang on. Trust folder and continue. Right. And then you'll see an icon over here that looks like a kangaroo. And you'll see this sort of interface, and that's it, really. You've already installed it. That's quite similar to the process of installing any VS Code plugin. All right, now the next thing we're going to do is add an Open Router API key, right? This is critical because this is how Roo will have access to LLMs, right? The main thing that Roo does is say, I want to do X, and then it'll send that message to a LLM, and that LLM will respond, and it will make the changes according to what the LLM says it should change. It also does similar things with MCP and all of that, but we will get to that later. So in order to configure Roo for your Open Router API key, you simply need to click on this gear icon at the top, and in the very first panel here you should see API provider. In the drop down, right, select Open Router, and then you paste your API key inside of here. And when you click outside, like lose focus over here, it should load up like the limit. Like let's say you said it's $10 limit on spending it, and you spent like $250. You should see this, right? The other thing that you can do is you can select your default model. So the one that I like to choose as of late is Gemini 3. It has a pro preview, and whatever model you select, you'll actually get this displayed within the Roo interface. It'll show you what is your token per token price for input, outputs, etc. Right? So you don't need to take a look at that in the Open Router models page if you don't want to. And there's more advanced things that you can do with configuration profile and whatnot, but that's really all you need to do, right? Press done and you're back to the main Roo. Now, if you have configured multiple things, right, you can profiles, you can see them over here, and that will be your primary way of selecting which model you want to do. And then there's also different modes, right? It comes built in with different modes like architect, code, ask, debug, and orchestrator. Now, these they come baked in, right? And you can configure your own, or you can use ones that are available elsewhere. All right, so that's like a quick run through. So now the next thing we're going to do is take a look at the vibe coding starter repo that I have prepared for all of you. So let's close this and go to github.com/injectivedev/vibecodeinj starter, right? And you should come to a repo that looks like this. And this is brand new, by the way. I've just created it yesterday, the day before recording this video. So if you find any improvements or suggestions for this, please let me know. You know where to reach me. And anyway, let's continue, right? So this vibe coding starter repo is primarily optimized or designed for building with Roo, but it has also been tweaked slightly to be specific to building on Injective, right? Injective being a blockchain that is EVM compatible as well as Cosmos compatible. And yeah, we'll use the Injective MCP server to get it specific knowledge from the Injective documentation. And we'll also use the Git MCP server that has been pointed at a select number of GitHub repos for Injective development. So let's follow the quick start, right? We have done a VS Code installation. Well, I assume that you already have it. We've just done the Roo installation as a VS Code extension, and then we've done the configuration, right? Now let's go and do a git clone, right? Oops. I'm going to do copy and paste. Right, and so now your project name, so shouldn't have copy pasted that directly, mv my demo all right. So now I'm inside this project, and you'll notice that if I do git remote ls, maybe it's just git remote. There we go. So you'll see that I have a single remote called origin, and it's still pointing at the vibe coder starter repo, which you don't want to use. So go to GitHub and create a new origin, and then remote add origin such and such, right? I am not going to do that, right? I'm just going to go git remote rm origin, right? And then I'll leave you to create your own git repo and configure the new remote. The instructions are here. All right, so we've cloned it, and let's open it in over here, right? So now we've got this my demo project, and we have got Roo open, right? We are ready to go, right? So before we do that, let's review a few files called architecture, pardon the typo, the product requirements document, and the task files. You'll find all of those inside of here, inside genai/docs and /tasks. So the architecture document is basically a template, right, with several to-dos and all the section headings for all the things that a technical architecture document should cover. So the reason it is left as such is because or the main idea is that when you prompt Roo later on, it'll fill in the blanks, and you'll use some specific prompts for that. And then the next thing I wanted to show you was a PRD, which stands for Product Requirements Document. So this is another thing that you will create during the planning stage, and what that is, it follows the same pattern. Basically, it has a template, and the idea is that by prompting the LLM, it'll fill in the blanks for you with all these to-do items, with all these, etc., right? And instructions such as this: more user stories, insert such and such, etc. So these are all templating language that LLMs generically are able to understand, and we're making use of those. So this is all set up for you. And finally, the last template that we have are the tasks, right? So the task file essentially is taking the architecture documents and the product requirements documents and melding them together into a tasks file. What the task file does is it breaks down into groups called sprints, and then inside each sprint, like specific things that need to be done. So there are specific things that need to be done and general instructions for the LLM to follow, and pretty much any project will probably start with these few things, and then after that, the instruction in this final thing is to actually create more task files, and each task file should follow the template that has been set over here, right? And that brings me to the next thing. When I said should follow, why does it actually follow that? And it's because of these other configuration files, right? I've got one for MCP, and then one for modes, and one for rules. So let's go through them, not in that order. Let's take a look at the rules files. So we've got several roles over here, and we'll gloss over them for the moment, but the general rules are just another markdown file, right? So these rules apply for all the Roo modes, right? Say you have to sort of apply these principles, and you should definitely look at these planning files, right? And then, for example, if you're coding, right, it'll give you like instructions like this, right? For example, that you should care about security, and you should care about code quality and style, and so on and so forth, right? The interesting ones are for the architect, right, which is what takes the planning documents that I just showed you and says review them, and then follow the instructions in them, and to group tasks into groups called sprints, etc., right, showing you all of those things. All right, so these are Roo files, rules for all modes as well as rules for the specific modes. And then we also have something called Roo modes, .Roo modes file in the root of the directory. And this one essentially defines what each of the Roo modes actually are doing. You can think of these as proto system prompts, right? So system prompts basically determine what an LLM should respond. So you give it a baseline essentially, and by specifying all of these different fields, Roo knows how to construct the actual system prompt that it will use in different situations. So saying this is the architect, and here's the role definition, then it also says what subset of things it is allowed to do, and so on, right? So this contains not just one mode definition, it contains all 5 that we have configured. Notice that these five Roo modes, they actually are custom modes that were originally based on the default Roo modes that have been provided or you get out of the box. So when you load up this project, because we have this .Roo modes file over here, when we actually start using Roo and we select these different modes, it will use our definitions rather than the default ones. If these aren't present, then it'll use the default ones that ship together with the plugin. All right, and yes, we should also take a look at the MCP config, right? So that's in .roo/mcp.json, and there are two MCP servers that have been configured. Now, the format for this actually is pretty similar, if not identical, to the config file for Claude Code Desktop. So if you have one of those, you can probably copy paste it into this as well if you have other MCP tools that you would like to use. But for starters, we have just two MCP servers configured. One is basically the Injective documentation that's been supplied over streamable HTTP, so MCP proxied over there. And that's something that we covered right at the beginning of this series, right? So this MCP server is now going to be connected to our Roo modes server. The other thing that we're going to be using is Git MCP, which is the general purpose one, and it'll be able to give us tools that allow us to read from either the code or the documentation and several other tools that I haven't, highlighted here for any specified Git repo on GitHub. So let's take a look at, there is somewhere in one of the rules file where I've actually specified which subset of repos to look inside of, right? I think it may be inside architecture. No, I can't remember where I put it. There we go. So, yes, inside the ask Roo mode, the specific instructions for that, it says makes use of Injective docs MCP server, right, to obtain documentation, and then make use of the Git MCP server and call search generic code, and it wants you to specifically look, or it wants this MCP server to specifically look at these hand selected repos, because there are examples of how to build code with Injective. Now you can add more here if you want. All right, now it's time for a quiz. Roo is a Visual Studio Code plugin that allows you to blank. I'll give you a second. And the answer is all three. So with Roo, with the ask mode, you can ask it questions, and that's similar to chatting with an LLM. You can also interact with MCP servers. It has that baked in as one of the configurations, as you saw earlier on. And it also allows you to generate code and update files within your project. And that is actually the main use case for Roo modes, for all the Roo modes. Next question. To use Roo effectively for vibe coding, what are the things that you should do? Give you a second. And the answer is the first and third ones, right? So if you want to do the middle one, the second one, triggering autocomplete on your code as you type, that is actually something that's more suited to other Gen AI code assistance tools, such as Copilot. Roo mode isn't particularly suited for that one. What it is best for is to configure and use different modes for different roles. In fact, that is what sets Roo modes apart from other vibe coding tools, is that you have a mixture of experts and you define all of them up front. And it gives you as the ability to define custom ones, as well as some pretty decent baked in ones as well. The other thing that it allows you to do is to use context from files that are within the repo. So when you have a chat history with something like ChatGPT or Claude, all the things that you typed, as well as all the responses, that's all in your context window. So what does that context window mean in the context of vibe coding? That's basically any and all of your chats, obviously, but also any MCP tool calls and results, and also anything that's inside of your project, like any files that are inside your directory. So Roo helps you to manage all of that and to update all of that, especially to do with the files that are on disk. All right, and that's the end of the quiz and also the end of this video. See you in the next one.